Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome each and every one of you to yet again another top 5 League of Legends video. So I really do think it's finally time to update the top 5 assassin list, because I'm also getting a lot of requests on people asking me to update this list as well. Especially now with the release of Duskblade of Drakthar, and overall assassins just really rising up to popularity once again. So remember guys, these lists are made up of my personal opinion and experience, statistics that I see on websites from win ratios in certain elos in certain regions, and from what I generally see people doing well with or succeeding with in solo queue or just League of Legends in general. I will also have one honorable mention at the very end of the video, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. The question I want to ask you guys in this video is, what is your current favorite assassin to play, whether it's in the mid lane, top lane, or jungle? And please do definitely hit that like button if you end up enjoying this video. But without further ado, let's go right into the number 5 spot. So the number 5 spot in any of my top 5 lists is usually my favorite one to talk about. The reason is because I feel like I can put almost any champion I want in the number 5 spot, sort of a wildcard champion. And for this video I decided to put Khazix. He recently got some quality of life buffs to his W and to his ultimate in terms of being able to buffer, on top of the new AD assassin item being released, Duskblade of Drakthar. So all of these things on top of Thunderlords just being a good item right now on these kind of champions because of just the raw stats itself, so the flat AD and the armor pen, makes me feel like Khazix is not only re-emerging back into the game in general, but mid lane Khazix I believe is going to become a thing, or at least I'm kind of hoping it will be. The damage he has in the lane is actually quite high, as you saw in the Lissandra earlier, even at level 3 jumping on your target, auto-attacking them for the passive with the Q proc in the Thunderlords, and really just dealing quite a bit of damage. His passive, having great damage in itself, also synergizes decently well with Duskblade, but also works very well with Thunderlords because one auto-attack with your passive is 2 stacks of the 3 towards proccing Thunderlord. He has great snowball potential like almost any other assassin, but especially in a team fight if you play it correctly or be patient because of the reset he has on his E and the distance he can quickly cover with the upgraded E jump. But speaking of his jump, well, before you upgraded a few patches ago, Riot buffed it to the point where his base jump range, now again not upgraded, is actually a bit larger. So when in the laning phase you're trying to make the play, it's a bit easier. The healing on his W in the laning phase is quite handy and it will help you sustain by a bit. He has quite a bit of outplay potential with his ultimate resetting his passive. The mana cost on his Q feels like it's quite low to the point where you can spam it and not really have to worry about the mana cost. And something most assassins don't offer is, well, Khazix has some decent poke harass, especially if you upgrade his W. Now the negatives about Khazix is, like any other assassin for the most part, he does require to snowball at least a little bit from the laning phase. The first few levels against a very good mage can be a little bit annoying and difficult, and he usually requires a target to be isolated for the full damage from his Q. Other than that, I will not be surprised if we slowly start seeing more and more and more of mid lane Khazix. And here are the recommended runes, items, and masteries for Khazix if you decide to bring him out in the mid lane. Now moving over to the number 4 spot, I decided to put LeBlanc, a champion most of you probably saw in my top 5 AP mid list a few weeks ago. For the most part, LeBlanc is considered to be an assassin more so than a mage, so this is definitely the place for her to be put in. Sometimes I feel like she's a little bit risky for me to include because I personally love playing her and I feel like she has so much pressure in solo queue. But believe it or not, I mean, closing out a game and actually finishing it up without taking your snowball and not really doing anything with it sometimes can be a little difficult. It is very easy to misplay with her in a team fight because some of your abilities just to even get in range of doing any damage are your main damage abilities to begin with, namely your W. But once you understand LeBlanc and get the mechanics down with her, I mean, the pressure that she can provide is quite immense, and she's a fantastic champion to pick when you want to tilt your opponents because some people will just feel extra helpless when facing a fed LeBlanc. She snowballs quite heavily like any other assassin, but especially if you buy Mejai's, which I do recommend getting on her nowadays. Getting 45% also means that you'll have your W's up as soon as possible, which is very important, not only to juke around your opponents, but to also just be able to do what you want to do in a team fight and in certain duels. She can proc Thunderlords very easily in the laning phase by using her quite simple harass, maybe an auto attack WQ or something of the sort. Compared to most assassin champions, her laning phase in my opinion is among the best because of the amount of harass she has, how hard she can beat to gank if you play it smart, and the burst power spike she gets at level 6 with Thunder Thunderlords. Her roam potential is also quite strong because you should be maxing your W first so you can use it to go over walls to get to top, bottom, or somewhere in the jungle a bit quicker. And for the most part, and I say this almost every time I'm talking about this champion, she has options in her kit. It's a big plus for me in my book. Whether you want to go full damage and assassinate a target with your Q ult, whether you need to be very mobile by using your W and then your ultimate and then juke them around by using the marks placed on the ground, or simply locking down and peeling a target with double chain from your E and then of course your ultimate. Overall, this is just a very annoying champion to play if used correctly. However, if the game takes too long to close out, I do feel like she gets outscaled and doesn't become as useful maybe 40 minutes or plus into a game. Last hitting with her auto attacks in the laning phase can be a little annoying, her wave clear isn't anything to brag about, and teamfights can be difficult with her again because of the sheer amount of different things that she can do. And here are also the runes, the masteries, and the items that I recommend you build on LeBlanc if you decide to play her and whip her out. And now the top 3 of this list, and the first one starting things off is going to be Fizz. Now if any of you ever meet me in solo queue or you just want to put me on tilt, I mean this is the champion to pick. I personally hate facing Fizz because this champion is very strong if you make any form of mistake. In my honest opinion, this is one of the champions that you probably have the least room to make mistakes with without letting him snowball just completely all over you. But at the same time, that's also what makes him a very strong assassin and someone that I recommend you learn. This guy is truly a snowball machine. He can easily carry a game if you play it correctly and as long as your team isn't feeding too hard, because the damage that he has within his kit and how it synergizes together is quite nuts. Not only can he proc Thunderlords quite easily, but he has an ability that is more or less an assassin's wet dream, his E. Not only does he have some decent mobility with this ability, but it can dodge essentially anything in the game. So the amount of outplay potential you have with his E is technically limitless. He has quite decent mobility with his Q and his E. If you get 45% CDR, I mean this is gonna be even better because he'll be using his Q and his E every few seconds. His Q synergizing very well with Lichbane, his W, and of course if you have your ultimate on them, well they're probably gonna be dead. For the most part in a team fight, he's made to not only be able to get to the squishies relatively easily and probably knock them out in just a couple of spells, but with Zhonya's 45% CDR and his E ability essentially being able to dodge almost anything in the game, he is very annoying to stop in a team fight, especially if your team is playing correctly and also being a nuisance. Something I feel like a lot of people overlook is his passive. I personally think this thing is insanely strong in the laning phase because I don't know how many times I've took extra harass, missed the kill, or even died because of minion block. Well, this is supposed to not be applying to Fizz whatsoever, unless of course a few bugs happen here and there, which is quite common within League of Legends unfortunately. And Fizz for the most part scales a lot better into late game ever since patch 5.17 where Riot nerfed his base damage by just a little bit but increased his overall scaling. Now the negatives of Fizz, well his laning phase is still somewhat poor. I mean yeah, he can take advantage of certain scenarios and he will snowball quite heavily off of them, but a very skilled player will make this almost impossible for Fizz unless they make a huge mistake or if they get ganked in a very successful way. His wave clear if the enemy team is pushing on your tower is nothing to be bragging about, and none of his non-ultimate abilities are ranged, so he is more or less an all-in type champion. And just as with the other champions, here are my recommended runes, items, and masteries if you decide to bring out the Fizz. But moving down in the list and going to the number 2 spot and probably also giving you a good idea as to which champion I have in the number 1 spot is Talon. Now let me quickly point this out. Talon in my mind is so close to being in the number 1 spot. I mean the difference between him and the champion I have in the number 1 spot is very small. But regardless, let's talk a bit about Talon. Probably one of the more traditional AD assassins in the mid lane, Talon is quite exceptional when it comes to utilizing Duskblade. He also did not get nerfed this patch whatsoever, so I have to say he is in quite a good spot at the moment. Ever since about a month or 2 ago, he's a champion I personally have started picking up again because I felt like I should, and I have to say I'm very happy I did. There are so many things I'm really starting to appreciate and love about Talon that playing him almost feels like a pleasure. So not only is he good with Duskblade, but he has huge bursts with Thunderlords. I mean the amount of damage he can dish out as you're about to see on this Vayne is quite insane. He also offers two things I feel like most assassins fail to, the first of which being a fairly decent wave clear with his W, and the second and more important thing is the fact that he actually has some decent AoE damage in a team fight. I mean, Talon's main purpose within his skit is still to annihilate a single target, usually being some squishy champion, but as you're also seeing in this example, the amount of AoE damage if the enemy team is grouped up a little too much with his W and his ultimate is very, very real. And that right there is quite honestly one of the things I absolutely love about Talon. However, the bad things about Talon and the main reason as to why he's still not in the #1 spot in my list is the fact that his laning phase can still use a little bit of improvement. I mean, it's not really all that bad, but it's just simply not as good as the champion in the #1 spot, who I'm sure most of you already know who that is. But other than that, Talon much deserving of the #2 spot, and quite honestly is ridiculously close to being in the #1 spot as well. And here are my recommended runes, items, and masteries for playing Talon in the mid lane, which I highly recommend you do right now. And here's a champion I'm sure most of you didn't expect to see in the #1 spot, Zed. Kappa. But in all seriousness, Zed is definitely the champion that got the most benefits off of the Duskblade item. Now, I'll be comparing him a bit with Talon, and I have to say something about Talon that I like is the fact that I believe Talon's burst combo is much more reliable than Zed's. However, Zed in my honest opinion does simply have a better laning phase, he's harder to gank, and he has more outplay potential. So as long as these things remain constant, I feel like Zed will usually be a higher pick in my lists than Talon. But regardless, let's talk about Zed for a little bit. So Duskblade is a fantastic item on him because it gives him essentially a second ultimate, but it also gives him some fantastic raw stats like the flat AD and the armor penetration combined with Yomu's and even Maw of Malmortius to make him deal nearly true damage to any squishies, which also does apply to Talon. Again, the main thing I like about Zed is the fact that his laning phase is quite strong for a melee AD assassin champion. His ultimate offers quite a lot of outplay potential, he has a lot of mobility with his W and shadows overall. He forces the enemy mages to almost always have to build Zhonya's against him unless they want to just go on a feeding spree. And I feel like Zed is one of the best champions when it comes to forcing an enemy champion to have to build an item very early against you to prevent you from snowballing. He is still the split pushing monster we all know and love, he's still absolutely fantastic when it comes to proccing Thunderlords in the laning phase and just overall. And I truly don't think it should be a surprise that Zed is in the #1 spot in this list. He has a fantastic win ratio across all regions, next to Talon of course. But again, if you haven't picked up Zed yet, I highly recommend doing so next to Talon. The bad things of Zed is, well, I mean, there are quite a bit of things to counter his ultimate later on in the game, like USS, Lissandra ult, Kayle ult, and plenty of other things. So playing him in the late game is a little challenging, and this is where a lot of Zed players will fall off, and it also separates the okay Zed players from the really good ones. His ultimate got nerfed a little bit this patch, I'm guessing to compensate for the new item being released, and in my opinion, the higher elo you're playing in, the harder Zed really is to be completely useful on. And just like the other 4 champions, here are my recommended runes, items, and masteries when it comes to playing Zed. Now before I end off this video, I want to give a quick honorable mention to Yasuo. This is one of my personal favorite champions to play, but I didn't include him in this list because I'm just unsure as to how strong he really is currently. Static Shift did get buffed, Fervor of Battle feels pretty strong on him, and he definitely has the potential to carry. But he still feels very susceptible to me. He sort of relies on his team to have a comp built around him and his ultimate. And since Talon and Zed are very popular at the moment, I feel like those two champions in a 1v1 scenario should usually beat a Yasuo. Either way, quick honorable mention for Yasuo, he's a champion I'll be looking at very closely throughout the next couple of patches, and maybe we'll put him back in the list. Either way, that is it for this top 5 assassin list, guys. If you did enjoy the video, if you did learn something new or whatever, definitely hit that like button to show your support, share with your friends, subscribe if you haven't, check out my other videos as well. And here are my favorite responses to when I asked you guys the question, do you think Jhin feels underpowered or not? But thank you all so much for watching, I really do appreciate it, and I hope to see you for the next video. Peace.